Copywriters Roundtable with Drayton Bird, who I'm sure everybody has heard of. He's a legend of the advertising direct marketing world. He has his book, Common Sense Direct Marketing, has been around 41 years, considered a Bible of the industry, and it's now direct marketing and digital marketing. Drayton has worked with countless famous brands, 7 car companies, including Ford, Mercedes, American Express. It's a very long and impressive list. And Michael Masterson and I have the honor of having Drayton written the introduction to our book, Great Leads. So, which is very kind of you to do.
Down there. That's what I did. I was down there twice. The first time they got me slightly drunk. The second time they got me completely drunk. This is not hard because I was brought up in a pub, which is a good training for marketing, by the way. A pub.
Yeah, that's probably true. That is probably true.
Well, it's true. It is. Yeah. Cool.
So a lot we could talk about today, Drayton. So I think a nice place to jump in is you mentioned that for 7 years you worked under a pseudonym. Why is that?
Pseudonym, a false name. I went broke in 1970, and I owed so much money to the taxman that I vanished, and I became David D. McMahon. David D. McMahon, because my second wife, who is a Maori princess, by the way, was married to Glenn McMahon, and I was casting around for whom I should appear to be, and I thought, McMahon's, that's a fine name. It was actually Jewish, but that's funny. This is true. So I became David D. McMahon, and I had a penthouse in Harley Street, which is the Doctor's Street in London, and my landlord was a surgeon called Mr. Fitzgerald. And I always remember going down to see him to negotiate about whether I could take another floor in the building. And he said, "Well, Mr. McMahon," and I thought, who's he talking to? Oh, it's me. Oh, yeah. I had a bank account in the name of McMahon. And I did anything for 7 years to make a living, often writing about things I don't understand. For instance, I cannot drive. I've never been able to drive. But I wrote part of a book about the development of the Bugatti motor car. I wrote part of a book about a guide to London. I wrote part of a book about cowboys. And actually, 3 years ago, I got a letter from the publisher saying, would I allow them to reprint it? I was surprised that anyone read it in the first place. So it's actually terribly good for me. It is very, very good to have to do things you don't want to do. And I am, like a lot of writers, I'm essentially at bottom shy. And during that period, I had to sell face to face, which is incredibly good for you. If you have never had to sell face to face, you don't understand selling.
Yeah.
Because all copywriting, quite frankly, it's just a variety of what you would do when you're thinking about writing copy to someone. What you have to say is, think to yourself, I have to get this person to read this, or I'll be shot. And it's not failing to sell face to face. It's not quite the same thing as being shot, but it's pleasant, you know. And I remember, since you're in Paris, John, I sold the rights to a swimming pool company in a nightclub on the Ile-de-France many, many years ago, at 3 o'clock in the morning, to Michel Leconte Philippe Jalon de la Boe. I don't think he made any money, but I did.
That story that reminds me of puts 3 questions that I want to ask you. One of them is about what you just said about having had to write about those different things. I've had writers ask me, how is it that they can come across as an expert in things that they don't understand? You know, they don't understand. A lot of times the writers they come from, maybe they wanted to be novelists, maybe they're just kind of literary types, bookish types maybe. They get into copywriting and have to sell things that they've never produced, industries that they haven't quite worked in, and that they have to learn about really quickly. So how do you do that? You say you don't drive at all, yet you've worked for 7 major car companies.
Yeah.
How do you come across like that? How do you learn it? How do you sound like an expert so that people, because you're usually writing for somebody else, you're writing in the name of the company or in the name of somebody who's an insider at the company.
Yeah, copywriters are ventriloquists. They're speaking for someone else, and they're impressionists. They are speaking as somebody else. So as a copywriter, you have to sit and think who you are, and you have to sit and think who you're talking to. Yeah. So you have to have many faces. You've got to have many, and that's why one of the great English poets wrote, "The proper study of mankind is man." Unless you're insatiably curious about people, you will never ever. Actually, unless you're insatiably curious, you won't succeed at anything. There's quite a good book. Actually, it was a lousy book, but it was an interesting book by the guy who saved Chrysler from going broke. And the only thing I remember on it is what he said: if you want to succeed around here, you better get on with people. He said, because that's all we've got. So
yeah.
If you want to succeed as a copywriter, you better understand people and be fascinated by people and watch people and wonder why they do the things they do. They are it's not the product, You can understand the product. You've got to understand the product. You have to understand people, because that's where the money comes from. Yeah. So I'm utterly fascinated by people. And I'm utterly fascinated by people who have to deal with people in difficult situations. And the best example I can think of is somebody who sells in public on a sidewalk. I was very friendly when younger with some of the people who wrote some of the first long form, half-hour commercials that ran at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the way they were done was they would find somebody who was very good at selling something, and then they would just film him and edit it. So I found that, for instance, I had one client, which is the leading home improvements company in England. I held them for about 7 years. And the first thing I did was I arranged to pretend to be a prospect, and I got one of their best salesmen to come around and sell to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we rented a flat, and we pretended it was our flat. It was me and my partner, who now isn't my partner, but who's still a very close friend. And at one point, this guy said, he pointed to a lot of radio, film, video, whatever, cassettes, and he said, "Are those yours?" And we said, "Yeah," which wasn't true. And he said, "Well, you won't be able to afford too many of those after you pay for this lot." What was he doing? He was setting us up. He was saying indirectly, "This is bloody expensive," yeah? And one of the great things that works in communication is the element of surprise. And if it's a pleasant surprise, even better. So when he finally quoted a price after 45 minutes of pitching, yeah, it wasn't so ridiculously expensive. And then when he said, "And also if you do so-and-so, we'll cut down so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so." That's what people do, And when if you're writing copy, the 2 most important moments in copy are how you begin, how you get people's attention, and then how do you end, how do you get their bloody money, yeah?
Right.
So if you set people up to think it's expensive, and then you suddenly say, "But you get so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so." In fact, the man I mentioned, Glenn McMahon, was the #1 salesman for Encyclopedia Britannica. He was my second wife's first husband. And I had lunch with him once, and I said, "Tell me, how did you sell?" I said, "You were the best salesman in the world for them." And he said, "I won't bother with the whole pitch." He said, "I'll just give you the close." And the close was just a whole series of things you got free if you signed up now.
Right. Well,
it's
you make a good point there, and it actually leads to the second thing that I wanted to. Well, this is a whole big topic that we can open up, but David Ogilvy and everybody. It seems to me like everybody who is a copywriter that I studied, have worked around, have been shared in the industry while they're in the industry, but who've been around just a little bit longer than I have, was lucky enough to get a chance to work with Ogilvy. And you're one of them, certainly. For me, most of my contact with anything that he did was the stuff that's on YouTube, and of course Ogilvy in advertising, which everybody should read. And in that, two of the things that he mentioned, one is that he was selling brushes, chimney sweep brushes, right? Is that it?
No, we sold cookers.
Cookers, that was it, right? Door to door selling the cookers. So, and he said what you said, which is that if you haven't sold face to face, you don't really understand selling, because that's where you benefit. You learn just a lot about people and about how to talk to people, how to keep people interested. So one of the things I want to ask you is, what is it that about face-to-face selling that you think a copywriter with the page, as you said, often a shy person, what they could take away from that to the page? And then the other I'll just mention, and we can come back to it because I know we want to talk about Ogilvy a bit, is really just a point that he made, that somebody asked him the best characteristic for a copywriter. When you're hiring copywriters, they can have all kinds of traits. They can be funny, they can be clever, they can be good with words, but what really mattered was that they were curious, that there were people who were insatiably curious.
Yeah.
So
that's incredibly important.
Yeah, let's talk. Let's save that one, and let's talk about the face-to-face selling versus the selling on page, or the synchronicity between the two.
I give all sorts of bad advice to people, and one of the bits of bad advice I give to people about copywriting, I just say, imagine you're sitting in front of somebody and you have to sell to them. And if you don't sell to them, they're going to shoot you. Now start. Yeah?
Right.
To me, I was very often in situations where I had to bloody well sell. When I was sent to France to sell France, if I didn't bloody well sell France, I was in trouble. The guy I was working for had worked previously for the mafia.
Literally.
I was very lucky to meet some interesting people. Some of the early Americans who came over to Europe to introduce modern mail order. I'm talking about we're talking about the 1960s, you know. And I met a lot of them, and they all had this absolute burning desire to extract money from people. I was actually writing this morning about Gene Schwartz, who offered me a job. And I always remember him saying, he offered me a job, and he said, I'll give you this book to write about. He said, tell me, come back in a few hours and tell me what headline you would use. So I came back with the headline. He said, so I'll show you the headline that I had written for this. And I said, yeah, they were identical. And he offered me a job. I didn't want to go. I was actually writing this morning about the guy who wrote The Lazy Man's Way to Get Rich. He offered me a job as well. I turned both jobs down because I had a wife and small children in England. And so I didn't. I go to America a lot now, actually, because my daughter is a singer in Los Angeles, and I'm doing some work for somebody else in Los Angeles, but that's by the by. But it is this, you've got to sell or you're dead and buried, you know. And that's how it was for me for quite a while. And it was terribly good for me to have to write about the evolution of the Bugatti motor car and the American cowboy and, you know, a guidebook to London and that sort of thing that I knew nothing about. It's very, very good for you to write about things you know nothing about. You know, the whole process of copywriting is that you ingest all the information you possibly can, and you always look for things that are peculiar that might stick in people's minds. You know,
right?
David's story, which he told me, and I'm sure he's told many people about driving to do the shoot for Hathaway shirt and suddenly stopping and getting an eye patch, you know, and that eye patch was the thing that people remember. What's the eye patch doing there? You know,
right?
And the other thing that's interesting about David is David wasn't original. He and his brother-in-law, the guy who ran Ted Bates, said originality is the greatest sin in the advertiser's lexicon. And what they're really saying is, don't try to be bloody clever. Try to sell. You know.
Yeah.
Try to sell.
Yeah.
He believed the secret. He told me I spent a lot of time with him. I knew him really well. I was very lucky that he took to me. He took to me, I think, because after I sold my agency to him because he rang me up. Somebody had written something rude about him in an advertising magazine, and I wrote back and said this man was full of shit, you know. And then the phone rang. Then it was Ogilvy, and he said, "Oh, that was a very nice letter you wrote." Blah blah blah. And I turned to my PA and I said, "Ogilvy wants to buy us," and we did sell for a lot of money,
Right.
which was the third one I managed to get rid of very quickly. But yeah, it's,
Well, yeah, there's something you mentioned there. That ad for the Rolls Royce. You're talking about car ads. That famous, all you can hear is the ticking of the clock at 60 miles an hour or something. And then somebody showed me a while ago that there was actually an ad 20-something years before that.
it was 1900. Pierce Arrow is exactly the same.
Pierce Arrow, that's right. Right.
Yeah.
But I think there's a thing that happens that's like it's kind of like incremental originality, where you look at what somebody else did, and you have the humility to say, "This is what worked in that, and I'll do that again." And then as you work on it, some aspect of your understanding of it maybe augments it a little, changes it a little, and it's original enough. But you know, I always think that, like, when I see like the kind of the cliche of advertising, originality is a sin, is those idea of like the Super Bowl commercials, you know, where they don't sell anything. They're very creative, but you know, 90% of them, you have no idea what they're offering. So anyway, so you were saying about Ogilvy and originality and how you started working with him.
Yeah, we'd been approached. We started out with no money. That's always a great advantage because you've got to try harder. And by the time we started in '77, I sold in '85. We were the biggest agency, direct agency, within 3 years. And the reason for that was we believed in advertising. Advertising agencies don't believe in advertising. You see many ads from advertising agencies? Of course you don't. They're good for you, but they're not good for us, you know. At the moment, I'm in the middle of a long book that we're trying to put together about Claude Hopkins, who obviously was the best copywriter who ever lived. And you look at the ads that he wrote to sell Lord & Thomas, which became the biggest advertising agency in the world in no time, you know.
Right.
They believed in advertising. Ogilvy believed in advertising. Leo Burnett, I also worked for Leo Burnett at one point. They believed in advertising. But most advertising agencies, you know, what's the old saying? Doctor, heal thyself.
Right.
They don't believe in it. They don't believe in it. They don't believe.
Why do you think that is, that ad agencies are like that?
Well, I think a rather cynical view is that a lot of the people who get to the top in any industry are very good at getting to the top, but not necessarily very good at what they do. You know,
right.
Ogilvy and Ross Reeves, you know, they were great copywriters. Actually, when I got my first job as a copy chief in London when I was about 26, I think, and I noticed that I wrote a memo to the head of the board of the agency that owned us, and I said, "This is why you should put me on the board." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because 18 of the top 25 agencies in America are run by ex-copywriters." He didn't know that. Nor could
I didn't know that either.
No, well, that was the case, you know, at that time.
Yeah.
It's become very corporate, I think.
Right.
Very.
Yeah. There was and I think this might actually have been an Ogilvy and Mather ad where they had a full page in New York Times or something like that, a London Times or something, where on one side of the page it said, "Gee, this is a great ad," and on the other side it said something like, "Gee, this is a great product," and it said, "We write the second kind of ad."
I never saw that.
And I feels like I've never when I first got out of university, I was looking at becoming a copywriter without really knowing what it was, just knowing that it would let me write and maybe make money while writing. And I went around doing these kind of informational interviews with ad agencies just to find out what was going on. And that was the most contact I had with agencies. But the two things I noticed, one was that that they seemed to be designed to please a client and win awards. They had lots of awards up in the office.
Yeah.
And to please a client by making the client feel proud of themselves, I guess,
Yeah.
which is not necessarily the same as selling something.
No,
And then the other thing that I noticed was, I asked somebody who was an art director in one of these places that I was interviewing, why nobody seemed to be over 35 years old in the office. And he said, because they're all dead. Because it was it's very stressful that, you're in an agency.
I'm 86 and I'm still writing copy. It hasn't killed me yet. I tried very hard for about 30 odd years to drink myself to death, but no, failed there.
So when you sold your agency, how did you work? Are you working freelance now, or do you have another agency, or?
What do I do now? Well, we have a kind of agency, We have clients as far away as New Zealand, all over the world. I do it because it's the only thing I know how to. It's not true. I do know how to do it. I make very, very good chili con carne, for instance. No, we work for clients all over the place.
Right.
And sell all kinds of weird shit, Yeah, we a retail store in Toronto and blah blah blah, all sorts of people.
And do you work is it the Drayton Bird agency, or is it?
No, it's
how do you function?
It's Drayton Bird Associates.
Right.
We've been going for. I never stopped after I sold. What happened was I sold to Ogilvy, and then Ogilvy was bought by WPP, and Martin Sorrell, who's a very, very clever man, although in this case not necessarily. He made it his business to get to know me. He took me out to lunch. He was always very interested in the people below the top layer of the agency that he bought, because they were the people who would end up running. Yeah. But I decided I didn't want to work for. I remember I was walking through. There's a little park near where his office was, near Berkeley Square, Grosvenor Square actually. And he was sitting there, and I was walking through, and he said, "Oh, hello, Drayton." I said, "Oh, how are you doing?" I said, "I think I'm going to quit." He said, "What do you want to do that for?" I said, "You pay too much money for us." I said, "I don't want to spend the rest of my life working like a dog to pay back all that money you shouldn't have borrowed." I was wrong, of course, because Martin, did a great job. He's a very, very, very clever man. But I decided to quit and start another business because I enjoy the business of marketing, the business of advertising. It's not the only thing I enjoy. I'm pretty fanatical about music, but I enjoy it. I enjoy puzzles. I enjoy looking at people and wondering why they do things, and questioning usually why they do things. I look at advertisements. I go, for instance, to a little town near a city called Newport near us in Wales, and the other day I spent 5 minutes taking photographs of the posters because I'm going to write a little piece saying why the posters are a bunch of shit. Yeah. So I'm infuriated by anything done badly if it's something that I understand, and I've been very lucky because throughout the years, I've worked for so many different companies doing so many different things, many of which I'd never heard of. That there are very, very few things that if somebody says blah, 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 that I haven't done something to do with, And I've had some hilarious moments. I remember I was asked to speak to I worked for American Express, having the accounts all over the world, which drove me bloody crazy. And eventually, after I'd left Ogilvy, Visa invited me to speak at a university in Birmingham. And I stood up and I said, there's a quote from a famous physicist in the hall here, which says, life is not only queerer than we imagine, it's queerer than we can imagine. So I've just spent 8 years trying to kill you because now here I am to tell you what I think I know, And I think about trivial things like American Express, was very, not everyone can have the American Express card. Whereas
Right.
visa is it's everywhere you want to be. So there are two polar opposites. And I think thinking carefully about things which are relatively trivial but which involve a great deal of money it's interesting. It keeps the brain going. The problem, the reason that most people, that it is true to say that there are very few young people working in advertising, is because they don't keep learning. You've got to keep learning. That's the secret.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting observation as I'm now older rather than younger in this industry, and I started out in my early 20s too, but I sense that that's that transition that just happens in life, but also inside a career where things change around you, and it seems like an ever increasing pace. And at the same time, as an individual, your career has a certain amount of success, and it's tempting to start thinking, "Oh, I know everything that there is that needs to be known." And yet, as soon as you do that, you start to stall, and you're less. You do less investigation. You do less going around looking at the ads and taking pictures of them to study what's working, what's not working, and things like that. So you just stop thinking. I mean, you mentioned music. I'm very interested in music too, and I have current musicians that I like, and they're current, but they're and then I like some of the younger musicians because my kids like them, so I hear them from them. But I like some of the older musicians that I want my kids to know. And you watch their careers, how they were kind of wild and creative when they were younger, and then they're not as good, some of them, as they get older, and others just get better.
Oh,
and it's kind of like a difference in attitude about being interested, still being curious at all stages.
Absolutely, curiosity is the key. Actually, you're talking to one of the few people you'll ever meet who's seen Louis Armstrong live.
Wow. I love Louis Armstrong.
I've seen more great musicians than you've had hot dinners, believe me. All my family were in music. As I say, my youngest daughter's in music. My two sons were in music. But and I'm very, very friendly with somebody who's.
Do you play it? This is something I ask a lot of copywriters.
I've no talent at all. I understand all about it. My two elder sons, my only two sons now, as far as I'm aware, they were musicians, and my daughter's is a musician, and I speak to her practically every day, and I listen to what she's doing, and I have another friend in Los Angeles he's won 4 Grammys, I think. And I'm working for him doing voiceovers, which is absolutely bloody hilarious. But we get on terribly well. He plays me his favourite stuff, and I send recherche stuff that I listen to because I've been following it for all these years. I saw Louis Armstrong, then I saw Ronnie Scott, and then I saw Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Ella Fitzgerald, just about everybody.
My wife is also a singer, and she hasn't motherhood and a lot of travel and things kind of get in the way of it. But she's trained does Baroque opera, but is a huge fan of Ella and can sing Ella pretty well.
Oh, so. She's at opera.
Yeah.
I saw some of the great opera singers because my second wife was a Maori, but she was trained by the same teacher as Kirita Kanawa, and I saw Kirita Kanawa the day she became famous playing the Countess in The Marriage of Figaro. So I was very lucky to have people that taught me, introduced me to things that I didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm fortunate in being very curious about everything. And by the way, that is the key to the business of copywriting. Every time somebody comes along to me with something and says, "Can you sell so and so?" and I don't know what they're talking about, I'm absolutely thrilled. I think I've got to learn about this.
Well, I find that with the music thing, to bring it back to copywriting, I find that a lot of copywriters do have a bit of an extra interest in music. A lot of them play musical instruments.
Yes.
I find most of them are, you mentioned before that sometimes writers are a bit shy. I find most of them are introverted at the beginning of conversations and maybe even in the middle, but they usually have a very good sense of humor. And they all seem to talk in this. They get more extroverted as the topic drifts away from pleasantries and gets a little bit more into the nitty gritty.
No, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, I was painfully shy when I was young. And it was only that I met. This is going back a long time. I got a girl pregnant because I knew nothing about contraception, and so I got married, and I had no money. And we lived in a house which is called a 2 up and 2 down house. Yeah, 2 up, 2 down.
Yeah.
We were the only one on the road that had a bathroom. The only one on the road that had a bathroom. Yeah. And people would say, "Can I maybe use your bath Wednesday night?" And it was, I was very fortunate because my parents had a pub, and the pub had 2 different kinds of clientele, very rich and very poor. And I used to talk to both. And one of the things that I think pays in an obscure fashion is maybe not is the noticing and being fascinated by the peculiarities of people. I always remember there were 3 old guys who used to in the vaults, which was the cheap part of the pub, and they had a routine. They would say, "Alec, tell young Drayton how their wife left thee." And Alec would go, "Went out for a loaf of bread one Saturday morning, never came back." I think if you want to be, quotes, creative, if you want to be successful, then an utter fascination with the peculiarities of men, and women obviously, is essential, because that's where the money comes from. Yeah.
Right.
Right. One thing I notice about copywriters now, I wouldn't say it's universal, but it's very, very common, is a very, very narrow interest, usually in matters digital. This is insane. Somewhere on one of my talks, or so, I've done a lot of videos. I go through, I think, either 10 or 12 disciplines that anyone should understand if they want to be a real copywriter. And my favorite one actually is guerrilla marketing. My daughter used to live in Montclair, New Jersey, and I used to catch the bus from New York to New Jersey. And I always remember going past a post, and in America they put little signs on posts, little advertising, and one sign said, "Our prices for such and such are the lowest you could possibly imagine," something like that. Underneath it, someone else had put, "Ours are lower than theirs, ring so and so." That's guerrilla advertising. So, to me, to be good at this, you have to be absolutely fascinated by all the peculiarities of human nature, and you must be absolutely fascinated by all the different ways in which you can persuade. And I found about 8: advertising, public relations, sales. You need to understand them all. And you know what? It's not nuclear physics. This is one of the easiest ways that you could possibly make money. If you're interested in people and you want to sell, it's not clever. You're not being asked to be a bloody brain surgeon, for Christ's sake. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always say that I have said before. I remember working in an office, and as part of working in that office, I was just borrowing desk space, and some friends of mine had the office, and they were holding a meeting about what they wanted to do with their marketing plan for that month. And we went in, and one of my friends there started out talking about the budget that she wanted to hit, the revenue figure she wanted to hit for that month. And they talked about it and talked about which products they could sell to hit that number. And she asked me what I thought, and I said, "I think what you're doing is going about this all wrong, because you're talking about the products and the amount of money you want to make, but we have not talked about the person that you're trying to sell anything to yet. What do they want right now? What are they thinking about right now? What do they care about? So, and I think all the good copywriters I know that's how they start. They start by talking about what are people thinking about right now? What are they worried about? What are they excited about? How can we talk to them that they're going to think that we're paying attention to them, and then link it back to the thing that you're going to sell. You mentioned, oh, go ahead.
I was once commenting on an aspect of this, and I said you would have to go on a long, hard, fast day's drive across the country to find any group of people less like their customers than the average copywriter. It's bloody ridiculous. They've gone to college, you know. These people haven't gone to bloody college, yeah. And right now they're scratching around, yeah.
Right. So how would you? That's a good point. So how would you say, like, what are some of the tactics to figure out those people? Well, we are often a lot different from the people that we're selling to. Well, so how do you find that common ground?
Well, I did quote Alexander Pope earlier on. The proper study of mankind is man. I go around a lot. I walk around where I live in Bristol for about 3 to 4 hours a week. I catch the train. I can't drive. Never been able to drive. Catch the train. I watch people. I watch what they do. I watch the strange things they do. I'm always alert to something odd. You know. They're the most wonderful creatures, you know, and they do the strangest things. And you've got to be obsessed with them. And also, I spend a lot of time thinking how stupid I am, and what idiotic things I do. So you have to be very critical, observant, critical, insanely curious.
I think you also, just to add to that list, is I think you actually have to like people. I mean, you can't. It's hard to be a cynic and be appealing. Find somebody appealing, a way to talk to somebody.
I like some people.
Yeah, you don't have to like you don't have to like all of them.
I think that the best copy is highly emotional.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think that the best copywriters are highly emotional. I'm insanely extreme and stupid. I live with somebody much more intelligent than me, who, from time to time, because he spends all their time doing it, points out what an idiot I am. I don't mind being an idiot. Most of my customers are idiots too. We get on just fine.
You mentioned that list of tactics that copywriters need to know, and I think now more than ever it's obvious to people that you can't just understand copy. There are other aspects of the whole marketing world that matter quite a bit.
Yeah.
Are there any just a couple other things on that list of must-know tactics outside of being able to write? I mean, sometimes when you talk to marketers, they'll start talking about the things that are important, and the things that are important end up still being under the copywriting umbrella.
I do think that, you know, the study of people is what it's all about. What are they doing? Why is he doing that? That's a bit strange. That's peculiar. Why do they do that? Curiosity is very important. Why do people do the things they do? I follow everything actually. I mean, I follow politics a lot as well. I've worked for both the major parties here, and for a very short period for a Democrat in America, and also for a party in Finland, the name of which I cannot pronounce.
Yeah.
But politics is an interesting subject, because understanding politics tells you a lot about people. I mean, people do not. One of the critical factors one has to bear in mind is that people do not do things for reasonable reasons. You know that people are stupid. People follow like sheep. People get excited about the wrong things. Sometimes, thank God, they get excited about the right things. I think I empathise with you being in France because I had 2 houses in Normandy, and I learnt a lot from going to Normandy. I used to leave England and fly over catch the boat to Normandy, and I cherish and I think I learnt a lot from talking to my gardener. I can even remember that, a meal when they'd cook some goose, and he said, "Profitez de roi, Monsieur Bird," which means the most of the goose. Have some more, have some more. And I think studying ordinary people and what they do and why they do it, that's why I thought I was very lucky to be brought up in the pub. I had a strange upbringing because one after time I was at the pub, I was at a posh school which I hated and ran away from once, and then was brought back. Didn't try again. But I do think, incidentally, not being fitting into the common mold, being a rebel, questioning everything is incredibly important. Why do they do that? It's only when somebody says, "Why do they do that?" that they come up with a new solution. Yeah. And what happens in the copywriting trade is that everybody copies everyone else. Thus, the great digital thing. Do you think that there are people making buckets of money running advertisements in the newspapers? Study them. Yeah. You should study what people are doing. Never stick to your own, your own little niche, your own little, or as they say in American, niche, which because I used to be, I used to spend, because my job in Ogilvy, when they got hold of me, I was given a very, very large amount of money by Ken Roman on condition that I would handle the American Express account around the world, which was a bloody nightmare. But I learned a lot about people. I remember going to speak to the guy who ran American Express in Thailand, and I discovered that he had 8 supplementary cards for his mistresses. And every time one of them annoyed him, he would cross her off the list. You see, it's that kind of thing. Are you intrigued by people? Are you fascinated by people? Do they make you laugh? Do they make you angry? Are you yourself highly emotional? If you're not highly emotional, then it won't come out, because copy is just good copy. It's like it's emotion bottled. Yeah, it's emotion bottled. People won't do things because of reasons. They will do things for unreasons. They'll do things for emotional reasons. And that's the way they are, and that's the way you have to be.